Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fit to Food Radio. This is, I think, 214. My name is Keris. I usually do these podcasts with Matt, but this one is going to be me solo because I'm fresh off the back of a couple of retreats where Matt and I have had the chance to really reconnect with some big groups of people. And one of the things that I've been sharing is my own journey recently into using more mind-body practices for my own health and also with my clients. And we had such a positive response that I just think it would be really helpful to share it with all you listeners. So whether you've followed us for a couple of years or maybe longer, we've been around for a long time now. I think it's over 17 years. And of course, our journey started with fitness. Then we went into nutrition. I then personally went into nutritional therapy, looking at how all of these lifestyle medicine really could help us in terms of disease prevention or alleviate symptoms of specific conditions. And of course, just also help us to look after ourselves, feel good, really resource our body. But again, if you followed us for a while, you'll know that in 2019, I got tripwired out of life and all of the things that I wanted to be doing. At the time, I would consider myself healthy in some respect. I was having a really nutritious diet. I was exercising, walking the dog most days, but also running, weight training, taking all my supplements. And I had a job that I really loved. So I was quite surprised when this kind of knocked me out. It was very stressful. I was aware that my load was building and far too much, and my body was creaking, and I was having these signs and symptoms, these suggestions and emails from my body, which I believe that if I carried on with all the good stuff, I was still looking after myself and these would likely pass. But they didn't. They got worse. And this episode, I really want to just walk you through the journey that I experienced. And I would love you to share it with anybody who may be currently having a struggle with, it could be chronic symptoms. It could be maybe they've had a diagnosis and they're really struggling to understand and come to terms with it. Maybe they're a medical mystery like I became, and they're going down the route of looking at Lyme's disease and mold and all these things that are now being presented as possible reasons we can't find a cause or even a kind of label for this condition that someone is experiencing. But also, if you just know someone who's spiraling into anxiety, depression, apathy, maybe just compulsive tendencies, attention issues, perhaps they've had a diagnosis of like ADHD, neurodiversity, and they seem to be, if anything, getting worse as a result of having this, again, label added to their condition, as it were. And perhaps even moving into self-sabotage territory. So this is something that eventually happened to me when I just could not take the stress of the situation, the pressure, I'd lost faith in the whole thing that I was ever going to get better. And so I just went the other way. And that's never been my kind of style. I've always been someone who, when I first got depression in my teens, I found that eating better and going for a run alleviated that heaviness and that not wanting to get out of bed. And of course, I stuck to that. And you could argue that was a great intervention for something like a kind of mood issue. But one of the things that it skipped was me ever asking, why do I suddenly not want to get out of bed? And I do believe that in our 40s and 50s, we get to a point where some things that we have been avoiding or maybe didn't address, especially in that very formative time in our life, our teenage years, when all the hormones come in and we're making decisions about careers, relationships, whether we want kids, all these things. And then we just got this roller coaster experience of testosterone, estrogen, whatever gender you are, things that we were able to override then. So some people go down the route of smoking, drinking, drugs, that type of stuff. That was never me. I was much more like, I'm going to basically work quite hard at school, try and get good grades, get a job and do all the good stuff and get that kind of validation, that recognition, and eventually got into fitness and nutrition. Actually, body image was huge for me as a teenager. If I look a certain way, I've got the blonde hair, the slim body, and people think I'm attractive, then I'm safe and I'm going to be okay. And of course, you fight hard to control that condition, no matter what your body is maybe rebelling against it in some way. So that was my experience. But what I see with lots of clients now, again, having worked with individuals for over 17 years, is that things that were not addressed at that point, this kind of disconnection with ourselves, this disease, by that I mean dis space ease, will eventually come back in our 40s and 50s. And sometimes it's through things like illness, menopause, injury. I saw lots of people have to revisit this stuff in lockdown and through the pandemic. And symptoms that maybe you had earlier in life that perhaps you resolved with a gluten-free diet or a paleo diet, whatever it might have been, are suddenly coming back round again. And it doesn't make any sense because you thought you'd sussed it with the nutrition, with the lifestyle, with the diet and the supplements. I very much invested in all of this, trained in all of this, went and did all of the different qualifications. I spent every waking minute researching this stuff, as you'll know, and just love geeking out on it. The microbiome, the nutrigenomics, looking at whether genetic mutations or SNPs, as they're called, single nucleotide genetic polymorphisms, was the reason that I maybe struggled with this, that, or the other. Identifying external stuff all the time. So constantly looking at all this information about xenoestrogens, so estrogens in our environment, toxins, chemicals, plastic, all this stuff. Like, this was the reason that I would have anything wrong with my body or any sickness, any ailment. And of course, I've seen this just accelerate in the last couple of years. And because of technology, because of our smartphones, people are absolutely convinced that everything that's happening within their body is due to something external. And one of the problems with this, and that we can do something externally, so we can buy a supplement, we can do some form of exercise, and now we can see lots of information coming through around the nervous system and suggestion that ice baths, cold showers, cold water swimming, saunas, breath work, even things like tapping. There's kind of some space for all of this stuff, but not as an override when your body is asking you to acknowledge and experience something, actually. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that. And the real piece that was missing for me was, I think, firstly, I'd lost the fact that I was a human being and I was just becoming a health-focused human being. But also, I edited in nutritional therapy, and I'm also trained in functional medicine. We're trained to look at like root causes and predisposing factors of, your genetics, maybe family, things that might be within your family in terms of predisposition to a disease, and this is a big factor, by the way. So I do want to cover this because so many people are so petrified that they're going to end up like their parents with dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer, all of these things. So we get health anxiety as a result. But we write this timeline as nutritional therapists. We ask our clients and we kind of plot, okay, this runs in the family. This happened as a child. This is a vulnerability that you had. Perhaps it was asthma, eczema, these types of things. Then there was this difficult event. Then you moved to the city from the countryside. So maybe this is a factor. And these are what we would call triggers or mediators of various different disease states within the body. And we use this timeline to help to explain to a client, oh, this is the story to your illness. And I've always been very holistic and always identified for a client, there's something emotional going on here. There's trauma. I can almost sense just in a consultation and the questionnaire, the language, that there's a problem in the relationship, the marriage, with the children. Actually, if you just are someone who's quite, you could say empathetic, but just very aware, hypervigilant, this is going to be something I'll share about my journey, was learning why I was so hypervigilant. I could always spot that the problem was often in the wider context of a human being in a struggle. And often as nutritionists, we have all these tools, you can suggest walking and ashwagandha and all these lovely things. But one of the problems is there could be lots of things that within the body that actually need to be resolved and addressed and completed first. And it's called emotional processing, emotional allowing. And it was taught to me by the amazing Sam Miller. You can follow her on YouTube. And we work together now. We're actually setting up a community based on this called Mindful Body Method, because I realized deep down, I always knew this was the problem for a lot of people, but I wasn't sure on how do we resolve this other than I can try and teach this client that there needs to be greater change. But sometimes that change wasn't even possible and they would feel quite trapped because it might be involving someone that they absolutely love and can't do anything about, or it can be linked to past events which are just really determining their sense of the present and the present moment and the future as well. So I was taught this process of emotional allowing, and it's become just bigger and bigger and bigger for me as I started to actually feel I guess I could say, first of all, feel the effect of it, the huge difference it made to my mental health and anxiety, and also to my symptoms. That was a slower process for sure, because actually symptoms were in some ways seeding through that I needed to stop what I was trying to do and actually look at inwards and do some of these processes instead. So symptoms were taking a little bit of time, but some definitely disappeared. The ones that bothered me the least disappeared very, very quickly. So rather than getting worse, I was more in a stasis, and then have now gone on a roller coaster with all of this. So just to kind of wind back, this piece on emotional allowing was so powerful for me that it is actually what I've been teaching on these last 2 retreats. And it has really spoken to everyone, resonated with everybody. And this is where I realized on that timeline piece, I'd actually edited my own in terms of looking at when I was diagnosed with IBS. I was 21 years old. I just got my first job, come home from university, and I didn't want this job. But my parents were like, please just to get some experience, because it'd be great to just get your confidence up. And they were very well-meaning in suggesting this. So I took a job. And this is when I was diagnosed with IBS. And when I studied in nutritional therapy, I was like, I think what happened there was the stress of the job and then the antibiotics that I had to take for acne as a teenager. Plus, I then got switched around onto a new type of contraceptive pill because after I came back from university, they said you can't stay on Dianet, which is what I was on for PCOS and acne. It has too many cardiovascular complications. You have to go on a new pill. So I switched pills. So there were loads of ways that I could point to. I reckon it was that pill and it changed my microbiome. I reckon it was, this is when the antibiotics caught up with me, or it was the job and this fear I had in the job. I worked in a bank and I was so scared that I was just going to lose like $20,000 or something at the end of the day. And by the way, that had happened, and you get these horror stories coming through. I also realized, by the way, looking back, that working in a bank, one of the pressures that was put on us was to sell debt to people. And one of my jobs was to go through accounts and find people overdrawn and then try and sell them credit cards and loans and overdrafts and basically make a lot of money on fines and commission. And this just did not sit well with me. And I was fighting to become part of the customer service team, where you get to help people and basically find lost money and correct direct debits that went out and fight for when someone took money. And you can basically get, and I love this part of the job, but there was only one position in the bank and it was already taken. So I was told I would have to go into the sales team and do that stuff. So you could argue that was a factor in my stomach issues. And I'm sharing that story because I actually think the external environment and the experience of it when I'm not where I should be and doing something that feels very against, you could say, just your gut feeling, that was the root cause, or one of the root causes or triggers of the sickness. But if I go a bit wider, I look at I think at this point in time, I just entered a relationship with someone, and the two of us had pretty much identical childhood traumas, and we were the middle child of each family, and we entered into a relationship together because of this kind of bond, obviously, this understanding that we had. And for the first time ever, I was asked or able to speak about my situation, but also to compare it. And we very much probably compared subconsciously what was going on in each family, and they mirrored each other. And I suddenly became aware of the fact that maybe our approach as a family was not the right one, and started to have this kind of bracing, contracting effect of fear. And also in this relationship, it was a much more social time, and there was lots of going out drinking and clubbing, and I didn't really do a lot of that stuff, but I did it with this new friendship group. And with that came this kind of freedom to kind of eat junky food and stuff. And I remember doing all that stuff, but then waking up and feeling horrendous, so much guilt, so much, I'm not, this isn't right for me. I shouldn't be doing all of this stuff. So again, this kind of disconnection to self. And I'm not saying that, by the way, it's bad to go out drinking and have a McDonald's on the way home. You can do all that stuff, but I was doing it far too regularly for my system. And my body knew this isn't what works for you. It was almost like there were huge highs and great fun and then extreme lows the next day. And so in that relationship, what actually ended up happening was I actually went down the route of getting more and more into fitness and nutrition, and much more rigid and stricter around my diet. Actually had, when I tried to stop the pill, and a huge bout of acne came back. And the partner that I was with went the other way and kind of got more into that kind of hedonism. So again, the stress of that, and that's where my kind of stomach issues really did worsen and continue and become more chronic. And what's interesting is I was going to nutrition clinics and being told it's FODMAPs, it's take this probiotic, take this digestive enzyme. At this point, I wasn't trained in nutrition, I was a client. And sometimes these things did help with symptom alleviation. And you could argue that they were facilitating function in a system that was actually contracting into what we might call an upregulated nervous system state. So we know now that this kind of ranges through several different phases of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop, faint. And your muscular system, your metabolic activity, your fascia, your gut, your heart, everything is contracting with the fear and the sense that you're not safe. And then it might have moments of relaxing, and it's moving between all these different states. But there was definitely a lot of occasions where emotions were coming up, and that was sometimes from the further past. and I wasn't able to fully process and complete them. And this was the bit of information that I learned about emotions that really it just resonated with me. So it was like a light bulb moment that my whole system went, oh my gosh, there's something in this, and there's something in this for you. It was that an emotion is generated within the body. It's an energy. And by energy, I don't mean, oh, let's talk about energy medicine, energy healing. If you're you're going a bit woo-woo for me now, but an energy, remember, energy can't be created nor destroyed. So my brain is always more towards kind of neuroscience and physics when it comes to health biology, all this neurobiology. But actually, you will see when I talk about this stuff that ancient wisdom and many traditional forms of medicine have always known this and said this for a long period of time, that an energy is generated, and especially emotions are energy in motion, and it's generated to basically elicit a response to something that you're experiencing. So you have these core emotions, and the ones that are most relevant to understand are probably sadness, anger, fear, but then we also have disgust, joy, and love. These are our core ones that work with our nervous system and basically are part of a survival response. And so when we have something happen to us, we have this energy created in the body. So if you think about it, if you're angry, that's your boundary and you have to defend it. So you feel this heat, you can feel this constriction, you can feel this rising. You want to maybe expand the chest. Anger, when you feel it, and it's not safe to express it at that point in time, then we push it down into subconscious, or we push the actual moment, the energy being generated, we push it down, and it then becomes trapped within the body and in our fascia. And this is what the work of Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk have talked about with Body Says No, Body Keeps the Score, is that if this happens repeatedly over time with different emotional states, we are basically signaling to the nervous system that we aren't safe to be able to do what we need to do. And so the nervous system has no choice with all this repressed emotion to upregulate into hypervigilance and try to bridge the gap, because the emotions aren't online and we need them. If you think about it, animals use them all the time too. So the nervous system's going to go up and lead the show. And all the emotions are there for our safety and basically to experience life. So fear does keep us safe. It makes us vigilant and we can run from danger. Sadness helps us process loss. And something I've seen increasingly over the last couple of years is nobody is processing grief. We're rushing, myself included, by the way, rushing through this loss. And then we're developing these character traits that don't make much sense. And it can be this overflow crying at everything because we've got this held energy that we did need to have a really good cry and release hormones and let us come and just have space to really feel the pain of loss and never seeing that person again. And we are designed to have that experience, and then we integrate it. So once we've had the physical experience of grief and the loud crying and wailing, whatever it is that the body wants to do, then we have this process of integration, and then we have this amazing feeling of like the memory of that person within us. But it doesn't affect our livelihood. It doesn't cause depression. It won't cause us to cry and overreact at the wrong things. And so what I've seen more and more is people aren't processing and completing their grief. It's still stored in the body. And instead they've got this, they're crying at everything, or they have a sadness or a depression, or they're hoarding, or they're like stuck in nostalgia and believe that their life peaked 20 years ago and it will never be the same. So these traits are there for a protective reason, because we won't process that loss. And so all of those emotions are really, really important. And if we don't have those ones that we might deem negative, but they're not negative, as I said, they are there to save our lives and help us to experience life and all the things that it brings at us, which are inevitable. We can't escape grief. We can't escape loss. We can't escape suffering and illness. It's coming through life. And if we can develop this capacity to allow it in, feel it physically within the body, feel that energetic reaction, response, and allow it to move and complete in whichever way it wants to, trust the body and trust its intelligence and wisdom, then it doesn't affect our mind and our behaviors in the same way. And this was the part that made so much sense to me. And I've talked to clients about it and got exactly the same reaction. I've coached groups on it now and at our retreats, and everybody has nodded and said, yeah, this makes total sense. And I wish I knew this before, or it was explained in this way that made sense. because there are a lot of people out there talking about this, but sometimes the way that it's delivered just might feel, as I said, too alternative or not sciencey enough, or perhaps it feels too, you have a part of your mind where your ego is based that will resist this because maybe it feels too painful to even go there, because it will involve somatic practices, somatic means body based, because the emotions, remember, they come actually from the body. So a bit more kind of neck down. That was another thing that I hadn't really understood. And this is despite several courses in biology and as in training as a nutritional therapist, we have to understand all of the different systems within the body. Same as a personal trainer, understanding physiology. And I'd always known about hormones and chemicals like dopamine and serotonin, and I've done talks on them and how we're all dopamine addicted now, and we probably don't have enough serotonin. And some of that is all linked to, if you think about it, the brain is the dispensary of that, but the mind is guiding the brain, and they are two separate things. And the mind is obviously taking in what's happening externally, and the sensory elements are feeding that in. But the mind is also asking for some connection to what are called body minds, which is all of the activity going on within the body. And what we have lost over time is that connection, and it's often referred to as mind-body connection. But as I said before, I think it puts some people off because they instantly think they're going to be asked to meditate and do breath work or things that perhaps you don't think could possibly fix the situation right now, which might feel so huge and painful for you. I have clients who are in such a difficult moment of their life with so much going on with kids, elderly parents, work, redundancy threats, financial struggles, and all they can see is pain, suffering, and future struggles, and they feel very trapped. And that, I've always said, it's a real catalyst for dysfunction within the body, which eventually can become chronic and very debilitating. And what I want to promise you is, once I learned this information, and then even better, learned what to do about it, I realized that actually you can begin to, first of all, allow all of these experiences to come in, and then you develop the tools to be able to work through them. And then you develop the capability and the cohesion in your mind to be able to respond and make some key decisions and actually begin to steer life back in a way towards what you were always supposed to do, what feels right. So the agency returns in terms of your mind, and the sovereignty in terms of your body all comes back. And you stop thinking about, maybe your distraction has gone to comfort eating, calorie counting, macros, weighing food, weight loss, number on the scales, all that crap. Maybe your distraction has gone towards functional medicine and trying to get methylated B vitamins and detox and spirulina, chlorella, ashwagandha, N-acetylcysteine. Maybe that you're there and you're in that rabbit hole. Maybe you're in the medical realm and you're still trying to find medications and structural abnormalities that would make sense. And yeah, there's room for some of those things, but none of it will have the effect that it could do without going to that underlying root cause and being able to actually get that connection back between the mind and body with these somatic practices, process previous emotions, experiences, which may be still within the body. And this is done, by the way, in a very gentle microdosing way. So we're not trying to flood you with everything that's happened to you at this point. It's just this ability, and it's like a meditative state almost that you begin to have across your day of, I can feel a funny feeling in my stomach. I'm going to sit with that and I'm going to allow that. I'm not going to think about whether it was broccoli or whether it was gluten or onions or garlic. I'm going to sit with that feeling. And then it begins to feed through just something. Often it will move around and it becomes a sensation somewhere else, and it moves and it dissipates. Peter Levine's work, Waking the Tiger, was one of the first books that I read on this. And also Cora Brack's Radical Acceptance consolidated some of this, but I still didn't understand the practice. And again, this is what I was able to really master under the guidance of Sam Miller, was how do I process these emotions and these experiences safely? And many of you know from previous podcasts, I did try things like psychedelics, and even gastroenterologists told me to try nortriptyline, sertraline, amitriptyline. I didn't do amitriptyline, but I did try the antidepressants. Interestingly, all sertraline did was give me one lovely bowel movement at 2 a.m. And I was like, oh, maybe this is the answer. My stomach's now full of serotonin. Nothing happened after that. So I weaned off that very gradually. But I thought it's interesting that gastroenterologists get to a point of actually saying this is a mind-body condition without ever saying those words, because they're trying to put chemicals in that regulate your nervous system and actually almost manipulate serotonin production. And I do have clients, by the way, that cannot come off some of these tricyclic antidepressants because they immediately feel symptoms and low mood. And I'm not suggesting you stop any of this, but I think that the emotional allowing skills and practices could be an amazing addition to other things that we put in place. Along with a good diet is just a no-brainer. Like, well, I'm not arguing that we shouldn't have a nutritious breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but also some pleasure foods in our life. However, what I'm seeing is most people have either got that in place, but are still struggling with things like alcohol at the weekends or binge eating on holiday or just binge eating generally, or they're so rigid and controlling that they feel that if any of that slips, they're in big trouble. And again, that's not the case. It's just this massive distraction and obviously going into guilt and shame cycles, which consume all of us. They're going on a bit of a flow there. I'm going to wind back a little bit just to say that the next bit of information that was really helpful for me was that the emotions, as I said before, so they are pre-verbal, they are physical, the cool ones are in our body, and they are constantly trying to feed through to different areas of the brain that we've just had an experience that was frightening. Think about it. If you were out walking and a dangerous looking dog comes around the corner, you feel that like physically, and it's generated. You don't have to think about it like, oh, you are to some degree interpreting the situation, but a lot of it is autonomic. You're just on, and this is your emotions speaking to your nervous system, and it helps us in that survival response, as I mentioned before. And then what our brain does is once the nervous system is on, we have that upregulation of blood pressure, muscle tension, and the pupils dilate, and we can just then act really fast. But our instincts are very much coming from emotions. Another great speaker who talks about this is Jaak Pansep, and he has a YouTube talk, and he studied animals and would talk about how they just know what to do. And again, that emotions and nervous system is just that key piece that most people aren't aware of. Now, if we don't have the space and time and ability to process those core emotions, as I said, they were joy, love, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, then what we do is we push them into a subconscious state. They're then in the body, and this is where they may end up linking to chronic disease. And if you think about it, because, the immune system, the nervous system is upregulated because we're not being guided by emotion. So it's trying to bridge that gap. And this is when the nervous system will start to do things like increase immune activity. So we might have autoimmunity, we might have histamine issues, we might have stasis in the gut and transit time slowing down. In fact, one of my strong beliefs off the back of this, and I've worked in nutrition clinics and taught nutrition, is that most digestive issues are linked to transit time and stasis, and this kind of mixing up of the gut's ability to have this nice, okay, I'm safe, I can digest this food, and all of the sphincters like esophageal, upper and lower esophageal, pyloric sphincter in the stomach, and all of those in the intestines, in the colonic area, is all opening and closing perfectly because the system is like, we're safe, it's okay. I often explain, if you look at your dog, they do a quick look around. Am I okay? Then I can have a bowel movement. That's fine. And so the digestive system has its own enteric nervous system, and it's always trying to do that assessment. What lots of the food reactions that we're having are because it's going either too fast or it's too slow. And, food sensitivities are a real thing, and we can definitely have the immune system tag it, but usually because this immune system is in that overdrive state. And you may have had this benefit of using anything from digestive enzymes to hydrochloric acid, prebiotics, probiotics. I think sometimes there's a positive placebo effect. Sometimes it facilitates function that the nervous system is stopping from happening. And maybe that was the solution. And if you dealt with some of the root causes, the emotions, the stress, and had some mind-body practices there, that might be all you needed. But for a lot of people that I work with, it just comes back around again. And they often say, stress is the thing. And I'm trying to think about breathing and all these different things. But again, they're not going to have the same effect. And they may even worsen if they're overriding in the first place. So even elimination diets, if we start taking out all this food, like where does it end? This is one of my big concerns. As many of you will know, I tried carnivore diet at the guidance of a gastroenterologist, actually, who told me 6 weeks, you need to do it for 6 weeks strict. And of course your symptoms go because it's mimicking a fast, there's no fermentation, your bloating improves. And so if your problem is reflux or pain due to bloating and all of that stuff, then without all of that, the fiber and the fermentation, there's no symptom. But if you're adding the food back in and the symptoms all come back, you haven't fixed the problem. You're just overriding it. And as we know, there's some frightening information now around what's happening with people's bloods on carnivore, and the diet in itself is not sustainable, the amount of animal products that you're having to eat. And something in me just knew it was never the solution. I couldn't even get enough nutrition in. So I just was riddled with nutrient insufficiencies in terms of the amount of energy I was consuming at the time. So I was waking through the night, having hot sweats due to low blood sugar. I couldn't even go and swim in the sea without actually going into almost like, I felt like I was going into cold shock, and I'd have to get straight out and I couldn't speak. And when I wore a blood glucose monitor, my blood sugars were going super low as a result of that. And liver enzymes were elevating, cholesterol was elevating. But I think that was actually due to the fact that my body was actually trying to generate as much energy as possible. And I've seen this with lots of clients who have undernutrition, that their blood markers will go wonky because there's just not enough coming in. And then we've got this hypervigilance going on as well, because obviously the body's like, oh, I'm slightly concerned about this. So I think if you have had some symptom relief with diet eliminations, it's not that you necessarily have to backtrack massively, but I think it's helpful to do this work. And what I've done is gradually been able to add back in so many foods, and that actually the symptoms haven't worsened in any way. And I've managed to get a huge, lovely, beautiful diet back in with fruits and vegetables. And I'm so relieved by that as well. And just to go back to the mind body piece, if we don't feel these emotions and we get this hypervigilance of the nervous system, and the next thing that happens as well is if we're denying that emotional state and feeling it physically and viscerally and somatically within the body, we go very neck up. This is something that I was like, yeah, that's definitely me. We go very neck up and we try and go into the mind. We get these very loud chattering minds. And we will often notice that we are developing traits that are not us. So it could be that you're very irritated, you're very impatient, you're very bitchy, you're jealous, you're very envious all the time. And that's because there's like repressed emotion. It could possibly be anger or loads of fear. And because we won't process it and allow it in, we're getting this nervous energy, and the mind is trying to direct it towards something that isn't necessarily dangerous. And that was definitely my experience, because we also can't have the joy and the bliss if we don't have the other emotions. So I started to notice that I struggled to be in situations like birthdays and just even cuddling Hamish and really feel it. Like I was like, I feel a bit numb. I'm starting to feel like I can't feel anything anymore. And this protection mode that my mind has gone into. And when I did start these practices, I began with meditations that were guided, and that did help. But actually, what Sam Miller taught me was these guided emotional allowing sessions. I started with yoga nidras, which I didn't realize. I thought they were just helpful if you can't sleep. But yoga nidras are actually a body scan that starts that process of the body minds and the mind beginning to communicate. The subconscious that we don't know is even there, speaking to the conscious mind, and we get this connection back. And then you can actually start to move into emotional allowing sessions, which are guided, and you can do 10 minutes or 30 minutes a day. And it's a bit like you just close your eyes and just listen to this session, and you'll start to feel this movement and this shift of things within your body that you've been pushing down and you're basically staying in this neck up area. And for me, what I started to realize was that I had lots of traits that I had developed. So for example, I would rather work really hard, clean out every single kitchen cupboard, walk 30,000 steps, than sit and feel viscerally fear that I had. And I was developing fears to things that didn't make sense. And actually what I need to do was just go back and process fears from times when I saw something very frightening and was just not able to allow that in, and didn't have a compassionate witness there with me, especially when I was a lot younger, to say, it's okay to feel this. It's okay to, it feels like this in your body. It's a sensation, and kind of explain to me. So obviously I would just push it down and go into that mind element and think, I can do something about this. So even from a very young age, I realized being a good person, a good girl, doing jobs and showing up and fixing and all these things. And that's just carried on into adolescence and adulthood, that I am the person that will read the room very fast. My nervous system needs everyone else to be happy and enjoying themselves and safe for me to be feeling fit to have those feelings. And so that piece of information made so much sense to me when I first understood it. So I was going into hypervigilance mode from a young age and developing these, what they've been called to me is process addictions. Process addictions are these tiny little habits that we do to give ourselves a sense of safety because we don't feel safe within. And maybe there's something going on in life for us that is driving a need for that process addiction as well. So just a few of mine to give you an idea was from a very young age, music and having music and noise constantly, radios on, dancing. So I would, if I felt really stressed about something, I would often dance in my bedroom as a kid. And I lost that actually as I got older, probably a healthier process addiction that I had, because I now do have lots of dancing back in my life with friends and on dog walks and just in the house. But obviously, eventually I brought in exercise, and I often say I'm just a really kinetic person. I just like moving. I love exercise. But it was really like, if I did not exercise, I knew that I would basically slump into a very low mood, and lots of fear and anxiety would creep in as a result of that. And obviously, becoming a personal trainer, I was able to do that all the time and never had to think otherwise until all of these things cycle back around. And eventually my body was like, you are going to have to deal with this. You're going to have to down tools, stop, sit still, and deal with this giant inbox of emails that really do need to be read and experienced and processed within your body. And you can do this one step at a time. We don't have to go into this like giant emotional chaos. So I have these practices that I do 30 minutes a day, but then I'm also spending a lot more time in nature, a lot more time practicing sitting still, trying not to go on the phone. So other process addictions for me are just working, scrolling, answering WhatsApp messages as soon as possible, just showing up all the time, just doing. Learning is one. So I'm constantly on a walk, listening to podcast after podcast after podcast, and then implementing it, buying the supplements. So you could argue that I look like a super productive, impressive human being on the surface, but I'm not if I can't actually integrate some of these things that have happened. And they are going to be your emotions are your internal compass and your guide in life. And one thing that I want to really emphasize is this work is so important, especially if you're somebody who is responsible for someone else. Because when you do this work, you realize you've lost that confidence in yourself. You've lost that faith. You've lost that ability to make decisions, to trust. You're very confused all the time and overwhelmed because we've got this like tidal wave of information coming at us. And when you do these very still guided practices, and I've also learned real meditation, Chan, Zen meditation through Sam Miller, that you are able to allow all this stuff in and none of it is you. You're the backdrop behind. It's almost like there's a whole stage play going on and you're the backdrop, and you can come to this place at any point and you can stop the programs that you've been running. One of my favorite phrases that I've shared with people that they love is, what if I didn't? What if I didn't? Because you have this instant, your first thought is never a choice. It comes in. And then you have this reaction that you would normally do from the past, this program that we run. Oh, this is happening. I normally step in and save this person. This person needs me. I do this. What if I didn't? And you can feel that discomfort physically in your body, and you can sit with that and allow it to be there. And when I started this process, what I realized was actually lots of problems resolved without me. I was creating a lot more anxiety by predicting a future that was very negative or very fearful. And that was based on the past where lots of difficult things had happened. So it was almost like, okay, I know things often go wrong for me. I'd often say that. So I'd have to be ready and I have to future proof. And so I'm constantly in a state of anxiety about trying to prevent in the future, trying to control. And you can't control half of this stuff, as you know, including the health of others and the happiness and alleviating their suffering. There are things that we can do, and it becomes very obvious what we should do when we do these practices. When we sit still and we do a bit more interoception, traveling inwards, becomes obvious what we should do and what we should eat and how we should exercise and what supplements we might need. And it also becomes obvious when we're doing it to try to settle our system or feel safe, or because it's what we're expected to do, because we're now the people pleaser, the good person, these traits that we developed to create social safety. So I want to reassure you that actually life gets so much easier over time. It's a very simple practice that we're doing. It's not an easy one. It's a very brave and courageous one, but it's also amazing as I said before, the actual outcome of it is this return to self and this trust and this confidence, which I think in this day and age with what we have going on is just an essential human skill. So I hope this kind of spoke to you. I know that it will speak to the right people that need to hear it. I'm more trusting of that process now. And I hope that you forward it on to someone that also needs to hear this, who's getting lost in this quagmire of overwhelm, attention issues, anxiety, all these things that we're adding labels to. And I promise, at the height of my struggle, there was no one worse than me. In fact, I think Matt should do a podcast on being the person watching this person probably. And now actually I'm really helping him to implement some of this stuff, because I think also he's been a great space holder for me. And now I can obviously help the same. We can never fix a person. We can hold space, and we can also walk the walk ourselves. And in doing that, we are able then to inspire others. And I think also one of the most powerful things that Sam said to me was, no one's going to save you. And that stopped me looking for the specialist, the therapist, the modality of healing that I might need, and actually just sit and allow everything, the symptoms, the emotions, the nausea of like, okay, don't go and do anything. Sit here and just allow this horrible feeling to come, and it swells up through the body, and I'm just allowing it to be there. And I'm not going to give you a time frame, but then you notice that the color of the sky is incredible. The flowers, the smells, like you get this ability to have bliss in the simple things and the sensory elements of life and nature. And so that constant chasing and doing and struggle and fighting and egoic stuff that we do and believe we have to do, like for me, the running every single day, the training, the food has to be a certain way. That's good, that's bad. Oh gosh, what about all these? We can't have the microplastics, the aluminium cookware, da, 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 da. Again, there are some sensible things we can do with all that stuff, but focusing on that when you're in a state of stress and you haven't processed that previous stuff is just going to basically be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And what's crazy is we're doing it to be healthy. So I'm going to finish up there. And as I said at the beginning, I'm setting up a community called the Mindful Body Method. If this has spoken to you and it sounds like something that you would really benefit from, please do jump on the mailing list. So if you email info@fitterfood.com, we have a waitlist for Mindful Body Method, which is coming in the next couple of weeks. And in this community, what I'm going to do is bring in some people who are incredible for me, teaching me, Samila being one of them, but also somatic therapists, yoga teachers who show you how to just wind all of this stuff into your daily routine. And again, help you with that probably missing element that you haven't considered, or that missing piece in your puzzle, that just restores you back to your sense of self. You'll be connecting with other people that are on that same journey. And as I said, this confidence comes back. We can just scrap this stuff around body image, around self-esteem, not feeling good enough, not having any boundaries. It will just all come back to you very, very naturally, because you then have this resilience after processing things that were quite difficult. You understand that this is the real future proofing. It's just allowing everything and trusting that your body and its wisdom and its intelligence knows what to do, knows how to respond to these things. And then your mind is following suit with this wiser part of ourselves. So please reach out if you have any questions. As I said, you can contact info@fitterfood.com at any time. And I would love you to join me and be part of this journey, which I'm very much still in. And it's definitely the best decision I ever made. So hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you over in the next episode.